Before we get into any of the feedback of the review itself, I need to make something very clear to everyone tuning in. This movie has a post-credit scene. I went to an early press screening, and all of the critics in attendance, except for myself and one other critic, walked out of the movie during the credits and missed the final button of the story. Do not leave during the credits.
I think you're really pretty too.
Gotta get with you.
Hi, I'm Lady Genevieve, and on my channel I talk about entertainment media. Today's video is a review of Girls Like Girls, the new coming-of-age drama which was predominantly conceived of by Hayley Kiyoko, though she has some other writers listed with co-credits on the story and the screenplay for this film. Girls Like Girls was originally a song released by Hayley as a music artist back in 2015. As a film critic, I tend to keep an eye on the upcoming releases months in advance so that I may have a sense of what I'm planning to review, and if I need to do any extra preparation, I can do so. I not only watched the music video of this song, but I also watched a video explaining how there was a certain amount of budget available at the time, and the decision that had to be made was to either hire a DJ to do an EDM remix, as EDM remixes were particularly trendy at the time as a means of further boosting a song's reach, or they could use that money on filming a music video. The music video option was chosen, and they opted to go for putting something together with a narrative. Essentially, a music video that was also a short film. This strategy proved to be incredibly successful, as that music video currently has over 160 million views on YouTube. The narrative of the music video helped to better convey the meaning of the song itself, and as a result, resonated with many queer viewers. Fast forward to 2023, and a young adult book adaptation of the song, also written by Hayley, was published. Now we have the film adaptation of that book releasing in cinemas. Hayley directed the feature film, which was made using the production company of Mark Platt Productions. If you are already a fan of Hayley, you're familiar with the song and its music video. You may have also already read the book, and presumably you love those works exactly as they are. And if that's the case, I would say that you're going to enjoy the film. It's effective in tapping into the emotional core of what those earlier works introduced first, and repurposing it to be showcased on the big screen. I read the book last month as a just-in-case read. I checked out a copy from my local library. You should all support your local library. They don't ask you to pay a constantly increasing monthly subscription. They're not a mega corporation.
Ugh.
What they are is a community resource for the people that allow you to read books for free. I didn't love the book, but important context for that is I'm not particularly fond of reading YA. I never choose to read YA books for any other reason than research. Recreationally speaking, I prefer reading books that are written for adults. More than that, I have found myself increasingly favoring reading nonfiction books. But even in the realm of fiction, I reread Hamnet this year, and I also read the Norton Critical Edition of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which had the original 1818 version of the story, which I do prefer over the more widely circulated 1831 version. I gave both Hamnet and the 1818 original version of Frankenstein top marks over on my Patreon, which is where I document my reading. The book and film introduce us to Coley, who has just moved in with her father after her mother passed away. She hasn't had a relationship with her father since her parents split up when she was very young. She already knows by this point in the story that she's gay. She's going to be entering her final year of high school, but the story takes place in the summer before that. We never see the teenage characters attending school. Upon moving to this new town, Coley ends up meeting a group of local teenagers, but the primary relationship we see built is between Coley and a girl named Sonia. Sonia doesn't seem to already have any sort of sense that she might be bi or gay. Once the attraction blossoms between these girls, in the book with the time you spend in Coley's point of view, you learn that Coley already knows that she's gay, whereas Sonia has more questions within herself about experiencing attraction to Coley. Sonia also has an on-again, off-again situation with her boyfriend Trenton, whom we hate for reasons you will already know if you've watched the music video or read the book. If you are a book fan, I would say to expect a fair bit of condensing in the film. Part of me wonders why they didn't opt to expand the film into a 2-hour feature. 2 hours is a perfectly reasonable runtime, and there was definitely plenty of additional material from the book that could have been included if they had expanded the runtime from its current hour and a half to 2 hours instead. I more or less always expect a certain amount of condensing to happen whenever a book is adapted into a film because they're different mediums and offer different things to their respective audiences. Books have a natural inclination towards being more informationally dense if they bother to do so. It's all words, and in theory, you have a fair bit of freedom to simply write a longer book if you as the author decide that your story needs to have this or that included. Whereas a film will almost always have to abide by a runtime. 2 hours is the most standard length for a theatrical release, but you can also find some films that will run beyond that, which I happen to encourage if it's a film or filmmaker that I really enjoy. If you're trying to decide between the two mediums of Girls Like Girls, the book or the film, I would say that both have their own offerings that the other lacks. The book has certain events, scenes, or details that did not make the cut in the film. However, where this film succeeds is creating a warm mood and atmosphere, from the color grading to the lingering shots on hands. There's a deep connection to the adolescent sadness and first love experienced by the protagonist. I've often found that books which are popular on the book branches of various social media platforms, and specifically the books that have been more recently published, they tend to have a similar issue of not quite having the sophistication of prose, the elegance of the form itself, to really create a vivid picture and atmosphere of the world I'm meant to be immersed in. I don't say that to yuck anyone's yum. I view reading as being even more subjective of a medium than film is. I'm merely making this point to give the context to any newcomers to my channel or to my viewers who are not on my Patreon and thus don't hear me talk about all of the books I read every month, that my issues with the Girls Like Girls book are not ones that are unique to that one particular book. More or less any and all popular contemporary romance books I've read for the sake of reviewing their adaptations are ones that, at best, I would rate as fine. With this film adaptation, I cannot emphasize enough how glad I am that it's colorful. Devoid of context, that might sound like a really trivial detail, but film is a visual medium, and I have grown increasingly exasperated by this incessant desaturation of modern filmmaking. Where are the colors? Why do your movies look flat and washed out, even when you have enormous budgets? We're talking tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars more in your production budget than Girls Like Girls did. If your movie is ugly and film is a visual medium, why exactly am I meant to give you positive feedback where it hasn't been earned? Having said that, I do wish that, narratively speaking, the blossoming relationship between Coley and Sonia was given a bit more depth and dialogue in the film. When they're beginning to spend more time together and have this blossoming relationship, much of what we see of that gets presented in montage. Banter is not to be underestimated in romantic fiction. Of course, you can communicate a certain amount of chemistry and the zing of attraction by having the characters exchange yearning looks, but there was not enough dialogue for my liking during that particular portion of their relationship. However, once we get to the point where cracks begin to form and accumulate in their romance, then we have plenty of room for them to talk. Not communicate effectively, but they are talking. If this film was 2 hours, I might have been more forgiving of that heavy use of montage during the earlier portion of them spending time together during this summer and forming a connection. But for the film to be only an hour and a half, I'm going to ask the question of why the film opted to more or less speed run through that especially lovey-dovey period of their love story. Having said that, I found the dramatic arc between Coley and her father to be more efficient in its storytelling. They have enough conversations, be they awkward and distant, or eventually more forthcoming, about addressing the issues they need to work through, the baggage of their family history. In many ways, it's more effectively communicated. For one, her father is an adult who knows how to better communicate what's going on in their relationship, what they need to discuss, the things that are festering between them, and will continue to do so if they do not address them directly. There were some aspects of Sonia's characterization in the film that I felt would have benefited from being better explained, particularly for the people who have not read the book first. If you've read the book, of course you can watch the film and look for clues that hint at lore that is explained in greater detail in the book, and presume that that's what's being conveyed. However, for a film like this to be truly successful among the uninitiated audience, I don't think it was doing Sonia any favors by leaving certain details out or perhaps glossing over them. That being said, when all is said and done, Girls Like Girls is a hopeful story, even with all of the sadness and angst we watch both Coley and Sonia experience. It's intended to leave the audience feeling as though things will get better. It's worth it to persevere through the adversity of the angst-ridden uncertainties of queer adolescence.
All I do is run. You could stop.
Now let's talk about spoilers. Some of these details are not spoilers for people who have read the book and watched the music video first, but other details are spoilers for the film adaptation and how it compares to those earlier works. One of the most significant changes the film makes is to the ending. If you've seen the music video or read the book or both, you will know that one of the climactic actions of those stories is Sonia's toxic on-again, off-again boyfriend assaulting Coley. Being that I had researched both of these earlier works, I was bracing myself for the entire film with the expectation that I was going to have to watch Coley get hate crimed. I was not looking forward to that, particularly with how much grief and angst she experiences throughout the film. Well, guess what? They removed the assault. Initially, I was surprised because it's such a major event of those earlier versions of this story, but once I had a minute to process the change, I really liked it. When you expand the story from being a short film in a music video to a full feature-length film, there is more than enough angst and suffering woven into Coley's journey that she really doesn't need to be physically assaulted to make a point. When you're watching the music video, it's a short film running a few minutes long. You don't have an entire story fleshing out the details regarding a dead mother, a fractured relationship with her father, and her love interest being very hot and cold with her. I really enjoyed the various world-building details to set the scene of this being a period piece. Some of you are about to be very mad at me for calling a film set in the 2000s a period piece, but the use of AIM and its sound effects, the Motorola Razr phone, the sidekick, the CDs compiled in a giant soft CD binder, which included some burned CDs in there, and perhaps one of my personal favorite details, the use of hide and seek by Imogen Heap. Dear sister, I hardly knew her. It's to be expected that a movie with origins from a song, written and directed by a music artist, would carefully consider the music that is used within the film. Even in the very opening, we had a cue from the original Girls Like Girls songs, which I found to be a nice touch in setting the stage for the story that was about to be told. One of the changes made in the adaptation process from book to screen is that in the book, when Sonia gives Coley her IM username, Coley ends up losing the username because it got smeared off of her arm because of her having been thrown into the lake and having to go home in this wet clothing. In the film, we see Coley being careful to ensure that she doesn't lose the username and add Sonia. However, she doesn't message Sonia because she gets too nervous to make that move. Once Sonia comes over to Coley's home to check on her, the dynamic is performed in such a way that you are still able to tell that Sonia was concerned and disappointed by Coley's lack of messaging her the way that she had promised to do. Essentially, the end result is still the same, but they condense the way that the characters reached that point. These are the sort of changes that make perfect sense to do when adapting a story from print to screen, to better accommodate the difference in mediums. In the book, the story regularly cuts to Sonia's live journal entries. Some of these are public, in which case we both read what she published and some of the comments posted underneath by people in her social circle. Other entries are ones Sonia has written privately, so it's more of a series of diary entries that spell out her internal monologue and conflicts about her feelings for Coley. Because the film maintains its framing of the story being told while staying in Coley's point of view, we do not get to follow Sonia on her trip to dance camp, and all that we learn about her coming to certain realizations while she's there. In general, the amount of material Sonia has in the book is better at explaining the pressure she feels, particularly from her mother in regards to competing as a dancer. It's not that this aspect of Sonia's character is completely absent from the film, but as I said, her character would have benefited from having more of that information explained in the film so that the people outside of the Hayley Kiyoko and Girls Like Girls bubble would have a more nuanced understanding of Sonia as a character. To circle back to the way the film has a lot of lingering shots of characters' hands, There was something really thoughtful and intimate about how those were captured and edited into the film. However, I will admit that there was a point where I thought that they were repeatedly showing Coley's hands as much as they were, because it was foreshadowing her eventually getting into a brawl with Trenton. However, as I previously stated, upon reaching the ending, they removed that particular part of the story. Part of me wonders if they ended up filming it, tested it, and then opted to remove it. Even if that wasn't something that they filmed, I have some questions about the poison ivy thing. For anyone unfamiliar, in the book, there is a point where the teenage characters go to a party. I believe it was at a barn. The police show up. Everyone has to scatter. They end up somewhere that exposes them to poison ivy, and afterwards they have to deal with those effects and treat them accordingly. In the film, you don't see anything of them going to this party or any other scenario that would directly expose them to poison ivy. However, you do see Trenton whining to Sonia about him having a rash as a result of poison ivy and then acting like an infant when she brings out the calamine lotion to treat him, even though he asked for her help, which she was now offering. Further on in the film, there is a point where Coley is remembering a montage of her time with Sonia, and you see them applying calamine lotion to each other, even though we never saw a scene of them being exposed to poison ivy. I have questions. Anyone that is following anything and everything to do with this film, if they have talked about this particular part of the story in other interviews, please let me know, because I am very curious about what happened with the poison ivy part of the story. That, along with the lack of deeper explanation about the pressure Sonia feels from her mother, about competitive dancing, and the heavy use of montage to develop Coley and Sonia's blossoming relationship, were the main things that I couldn't help but question insofar as the choices that were made about how to make the film and adapt the book. All three were elements that I would have expanded further so that we would hit at least 1 hour and 45 minutes in the runtime, as opposed to the modest 1 hour and a half that we currently have. Listen, if you are a higher up on Girls Like Girls, if there is extra footage, assemble a longer cut and put that on the DVD. Physical media is absolutely essential to the preservation of art. If Girls Like Girls is a favorite film of yours, you should consider supporting it on physical media once it gets released. Finally, I want to praise the end credit scene. It's the more romantic, hopeful button or punctuation to close off this story. It's odd to think of how many of the critics at my screening, or the moviegoers who are not hardcore about film, and as such they jump up and run out of the cinema once the credits begin to roll, they're going to miss the cuter, more romantic ending presented after the credits. If you walk out when the credits begin, the last thing you see in the film is Sonia and Coley at the pool. Sonia says she's tired of running and Coley tells her she could stop running. It's by no means a bad ending in its own right, but the tone is decidedly less upbeat than the ending that happens after the credits, where Sonia chases Coley down and they kiss, and there's more of an indication that they are finally going to give their relationship a proper go this time. With all the running away Sonia has been doing for much of the story, now she's finally running towards Coley. That's the full circle catharsis the romance girlies want to see at the end of a love story. Imagine missing out on that because you've been wrongly conditioned to walk out without letting the credits finish. I always stay for the credits because sometimes you pick up extra details you either didn't know you wanted to know, or you can get information you were looking for. Sometimes I will hear a song in the film soundtrack and I want to get the information of that song, so I just wait for the credits to reach the end and I can find that out without having to go look it up afterwards in a search engine that wants to stalk my entire life on the boardwalk and steal my data. Overall, I would say Girls Like Girls is an emotionally moving story that ends on a hopeful note, and a decidedly more romantic one if you do not walk out before the end credits scene. It would be interesting to see whether or not Hayley would like to do any more directing of feature films. It's definitely a commitment that would take up a fair bit of her time in her presumably quite busy schedule when she's already preoccupied with her music career, but I definitely see potential in her work on this to develop further if she were to pursue directing other feature films in the future.